Let's go to John Garcia, BamaOnline.com, 247 Sports, national recruiting analyst. John Garcia, welcome to T-Town. I hope you're having an awesome Monday, man.
Good to be on with you, my friend. Doing well.
Good, man. It's a Monday. We're talking college football, 11 days away, 40 days away from Alabama Crimson Tide football, brought to you by Alabama Credit Union. John, when you look back from your advantage point, 12 years in Tuscaloosa, what do you think has been the smartest decision Nick Saban has made in T-Town?
Gosh, you could write a whole book on that. I'm in terms of where things are right now and where the balance is, where the power is. I'm inclined to go onside kick, I think, because if you don't, in theory, you don't make that call, Bama doesn't win that game, let's say. So now Clemson has 3 national titles all over Alabama in this stretch. So right now, everything we talk about is Bama, Clemson, Clemson, Bama. It's like it's an even thing. It wouldn't be like that. It would be Clemson and then Gap and then everybody else led by Alabama. So I think evening the series with Clemson, basically, I guess because of that play, or in part because of that play, I think was critical, because when kids talk about these schools, they're in unison with those 2 programs today. And I think that one game would have swayed it, 3 national titles to none, with all 3 titles over the other. I mean, that's at that point, it's not a rivalry, right? So even with Bama winning the semifinal game last year, or 2 years ago. So I think that one, in terms of today, probably is the most important in terms of prolonging this Alabama dynasty. And like we said last time I was on with you, I do think Alabama and Clemson are both in the middle of a dynasty right now. And I think 2 can have a dynasty at the same time when they meet each other and it's even. And obviously every year, literally, it's been the other team winning. It's gone back and forth. So if you believe in that as well, you're pretty happy as a Bama fan, because it means it's Bama's turn, considering what happened in January.
John, let me ask you to kind of handle this Julio Jones, because we've had several people that have called in and said smartest decision is recruiting Julio Jones the way that he did. And everybody was going after Julio Jones. So it wasn't smart to recruit him. It was just maybe that he took the approach of saying, hey, listen, man, we're going to win with you or we're going to win without you. And Julio has told us that that's what helped him make that decision, because Nick Saban wasn't blowing smoke and, telling him everything he wanted to hear, and said, hey, listen, that's what was appealing to me.
I think certain people, that's the minority, right? In terms of what appeals to you. When you're a recruit, I mean, gosh, we talk to them every day, and most of them don't want to hear that. They want the love, right? That's what you hear. This school shows me the most love. Well, Julio would not have said that about Alabama at that point, but he wasn't searching for the attention. So I do think that, yes, the decision to recruit him that way was critical, but also on his end, I think he deserves a lot of that credit as well, because he was willing to be one of those guys who wanted competition. He wanted to work. I think he said, in that class, there were like 6 receivers or 5 receivers taken by Alabama in that first class. So, that the number 1 receiver in the country probably doesn't go to a school that has 4 or 5 receivers committed in this day and age. So I think Julio and who he is and the type of mental makeup he has is just as big a part of that as how Nick Saban said, hey, I'm going to be consistent in how I recruit this kid, and I don't care if he's the number 1 receiver in the country. We're still going to recruit him kind of how we recruit. So you give credit to both sides there. And there's no doubt that he's the most important individual recruit that Alabama has ever brought in under Nick Saban. That I don't even think there's much of a question there in terms of Julio Jones. So hey, that's a good submission. And like you said, I don't think there's a wrong answer. All of these make sense. Playing Tua, going with your gut there. I mean, wow. At the time, there was certainly, you heard it, Ryan. There were a lot of rumblings that, hey, this kid was doing all these things in practice, and some people may or may not have wanted that to happen, but you see, he still did it. He still pulled the trigger on that move, and that's a tough call. That's a tough call, obviously. So there's so many things you could go into, but certainly Julio, I think, deserves his end of credit on that as well, because there's not a lot of kids in any era that would appreciate it like he did. And obviously that's who he is and probably part of the reason he's still having success at the highest level.
We're talking to John Garcia right now, national recruiting analyst for 247 Sports, 247 Sports. John, this gap is getting close and close and close and close and close. Alabama closing the gap. We thought this was as wide as the Grand Canyon earlier, that Clemson would not be able to do it, but you kept saying that there was a possibility. They have closed that gap to really, really tight when I'm looking at the team rankings here of 247 Sports.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a numbers game. That's what we've said all along. Clemson at 18 commits right now, Bama 22. So they have 4 more commits yet have less points. So that tells you the quality of each Clemson commitment. And look, it's not like Alabama's taking bad players. It's just Clemson has 5 5-stars, and the next 3 teams have 6 combined. So that's just where this class is right now between those 2 programs. And Clemson certainly isn't done, but Alabama isn't done either. I think both teams can take 3, 4, 5 more kids before all is said and done. So in terms of who finishes number 1, it's going to depend on where those rankings end up for those individual recruits. And again, that's January, so we got a ways to go, pretty much no matter what. But the race, I do think, is more interesting than we thought. I think Ohio State has a shot at number 1 if certain things break their way. They're sitting there at number 3, just 4 points behind Alabama. So it like you said, it seemed like it was just Clemson, a matter of when and not if. But if they take 20 kids and Bama's taking 26, Ohio State's taking 25, the formula would favor those teams taking more prospects. So it is what it is at that point. So I do think it'll be interesting to follow. But Clemson, I know, has a big weekend. I mean, a lot of schools have a big weekend coming up. The dead period is ending on Wednesday, so schools are able to host kids just for a couple of days over the weekend before everybody, once the calendar hits August, everybody kind of focuses on their own individual season. So typically there's a little bit of a spike in recruiting this coming weekend because kids have been home. They've been, doing summer stuff. So now they get to these college campuses one last time, and that often does result in commitment. So I think there could be some movement here in the next few days, but Clemson won't be short on commits as well. So that'll be something to track. But yeah, it's going to go till January, and that's not something I always thought in looking at this class a few months back.
John, I've asked you this, and it continues to come up. Every time we have you on, there's a few questions that get passed through the Twitter account for me to work in the conversation. Have you thought about a number? Is this 27? Is it 28? Does it go to 25? They're at 22 right now. How much more is left? Because when you start thinking about 22, there cannot be that many more scholarships available, right?
Right. You look at the positions, and that's where I always go in covering any team, right? There's no quarterback yet, so we know in theory. I mean, Christian Story committed. He plays quarterback at Lynette, but we expect him to be a skill guy at Alabama. And now that door is open from both sides. Christian is open to playing quarterback, and Alabama is telling him today that they're open for him to play that position. But I'm not expecting it, and we don't project him as a quarterback at this point. So he is verbally committed, but I do think there's a quarterback looming in this class, and for Alabama, it would be Bryce Young if all things went the right way, 5-star quarterback out of California, who's currently committed to USC. So obviously there's a lot to be said there. But even separate from quarterback, you look at certain positions and it's just a little bit light. One running back, we know they want to bring in at least one more. Tight end is a big question mark. They're in it for 2 5-star tight ends in Darnell Washington and Arik Gilbert. A lot of people feel like between Alabama and Georgia, those 2 teams are going to land those 2 guys in some way, shape, or form. So we know tight end is not completely done at this point. Offensive line, 3 committed right now. There are question marks with at least one of them, and there are still targets out there to be had. We know there's going to be an addition there. So my point is we're already at 25, 26, just in the hypothetical 2 or 3 positions in. So it tells you that it's going to be 25 plus in this class. That final number could fluctuate there, but the trend tells you it's going to be over 25 in this class. And that's with some movement recently with verbal commits, decommitting. DeRicky Wright, the Jalen Warsham. What we've hinted at for the last few months has started to happen with current verbals backing off for one reason or another. So I do think you could still see a little bit more of that, not expecting a ton more at this point, but there could still be wiggle room there on both ends from Alabama's perspective and from the recruit's perspective. But just in focusing on the positions, we know there are still several spots available. And look, it's fluid, so it can change tomorrow, but I would be surprised if it was 25 or under at this point.
All right, you mentioned some quarterbacks. Let's go through a couple that you think might be a possibility. You think Bryce Young is possible? I mean, because
I do. I think he's the most likely.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. I mean, he's committed to USC. He's saying all the right things, but he's admitted, hey, Alabama's right there. Alabama has been there for quite some time. Obviously, Bama, when it comes to quarterbacks on the West Coast, it's been a thing, right, recently. And look, USC's situation is not the most stable, and Bryce has admitted that. That's why he remains in communication with Alabama. That's not typical. When you're a quarterback and you're a headlining guy like he is, you're usually shut down. When Tua committed to Bama, that was it. When Jalen committed to Bama, that was it. You don't typically maintain those relationships with other schools trying to recruit you, but he has with Alabama, and it's come from his end, his family's end, his camp's end. It's not just hey, my family, everybody wants USC, and I'm the only one talking to Bama. It's a group effort on that front. So there's legitimate interest on both ends, and he's keeping an eye out. He's keeping an eye out on things. Obviously, if USC continues on the trend they've been on, then he is certainly liable to open things up. And there are some people traveling to national events this year, the opening in Texas, the Elite 11 semifinals. There are some people who think that it's not, I wouldn't say a foregone conclusion, but some people think it's more likely than not at this point that Young ends up at Alabama. Now, I'm not there yet. I'm not a West Coast guy. I'm not in with the kid like some others, but in being around him and his camp, there is no doubt that there is true interest in Alabama from there. And I think that's the reason that Alabama does not have a true no-brainer quarterback commitment at this point. I think they would rather not take one in this class than potentially miss on a guy like Bryce Young, who he's a smaller guy, but man, everything else is there. There's some Kyler Murray comparisons there in terms of dual threat ability, big arm, baseball, all of those things that we said about Kyler coming out, despite the stature. Some of those things really resonate with Bryce. Nobody throws a better ball in this class of 2020. And obviously, look, it's important for Alabama. You don't have to be, Bill Belichick, Vince Lombardi, any of these guys to look at after this season. A ton of question marks at that position, right? I mean, that's natural. That's normal. So getting a guy who we would think has a legit shot to play day one is very critical for this class. And if that exists in 2020, it has to be Bryce Young for Alabama, in my opinion. And I think that's why Bama's treating it as such.
All right, so as we go into the conversation, when you look at quarterbacks, let me tie what the current conversation is when we're talking about smartest decision, because let's go back to 2013. Hiring Lane Kiffin, moving that offense in that direction. How appealing is it? Because it's an easier sell when you're throwing to all these wide receivers, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, a Blitnikoff winner coming back, and it's more appealing to these quarterbacks. Alabama's a more attractive venue. It's not just smash mouth defense and running it between the tackles. How much did Lane Kiffin and Nick Saban change the recruiting aspect by going this direction?
That was, in terms of prolonging the dynasty and extending it, that was it. It was Nick opening up in general. I think even on defense, he opened up a lot and changed a lot of the type of players he recruited. The Terrence Cody's of the world don't fit in today's game. And Nick, that was Nick's thing forever. Those guys don't fit in today's game. So I think he adjusted on both sides of the ball, but obviously the most dramatic was with Lane Kiffin going wide open, pass first at times. At some point, some of us probably thought we would never say that about a Nick Saban coached team. So that was absolutely paramount. And like you said, it's created not only an attraction for quarterbacks, and Bama has signed I think in the last 5 years they've beaten out the highest ranking of a quarterback they've signed like 3 times. I remember covering after A.J. McCarron, I think the highest ranked one, or before that it was, I think, Brody Croyle, and then Blake Barnett became the highest ranked one, and then Tua Tagovailoa became the highest ranked one. So and Bryce Young now would contend for that. So they've broken kind of other records with that position. So quarterbacks have been, more appealed towards Alabama as well. So I think that was huge. It was the style. There was a balance almost in how kids viewed Alabama. You had Nick Saban, the disciplinarian, and then you had Lane Kiffin, kind of the young innovator, maybe a couple more jokes. So for the offensive room, there was some balance there. So you could get kind of the classic Alabama sale and then the new age one all together. And I think Nick has tried to maintain that following Lane's departure in his offensive hires. I think he's tried to maintain that youth, that open-mindedness, and obviously since Lane has gone, we've seen the offense thrive just as much, if not more. So I think that's a huge credit to him, and there's no doubt that catching up to the game. There was a couple years there where it looked like you didn't know if it would happen, but that was a big step forward in it actually happening.
College football recruiting analyst 247 Sports. John, tell us where they can read more information and get in contact with some of your latest work.
Yeah, absolutely. 247sports.com. It's ramping up. Like I said, there's a kind of a sneaky big weekend coming up for everybody, including Alabama. So Bama Online will have you covered there. But to keep track of Clemson and Ohio State, these other schools that are potentially in it, just like Bama, 247sports.com, your team all the time.
It is John Garcia _Jr. there. Find him on the Twitter account. Join those thousands of college football fans that connect with John Garcia. John, as always, man, thank you again for getting the week kicked off here in Tuscaloosa. We always appreciate the conversations. I hope you have a great week, man. Thank you.
Absolutely, Ryan. My pleasure.